The gavel stalled midair. A woman's pride was about to be sold. They dragged 3 benches into the courthouse and called it an auction hall. Dust hung in the sun-struck air. Men stood with hats in their hands. Ruth Calder kept her chin level and her fingers on a worn book. Now she was a ledger line. Lot 7, the banker read, smooth as tallow. Household effects, 1 quilt iron kettle and temporary labor to settle remaining notes. Tom pressed close to Ruth's skirt. Clara, 5, set her hand down. Dignity, her mother had taught her, is the last clean dress we own. We wear it even when it's patched. The banker lifted the gavel. Bidding will open it. I'll stop it there, a voice said, even in carrying. Heads turned. He stood in the doorway like the day had taken shape and walked in. Tall coat dusty, beard neat, hat brim sweat-stained but handled with care. In his left hand, a paddle cut from pine held upright as if it were a promise. Mr. Hale, the banker said, tasting complication, this is a lawful proceeding. Then let's see it done lawfully, the man answered. Ethan Hale, I'm not bidding for her labor. He looked at Ruth, not through her. I'm hiring a tutor. The room breathed again, but differently. I've 5 trail orphans at my table, Hale said, voice steady. They need letters and numbers. I've a room and wages. If she takes it, the bank can take a fair share toward what's owed, but no one sells her. The judge cleared his throat. Mrs. Calder, do you consent to the offer? Consent, a plank between ruin and family. Ruth studied the man's boots, mended carefully. His hands, rope burns old and new, a thumb nick healed rough. What would I teach? She asked, because a woman must use her mind. Reading and numbers, he said. Weather signs. A little history so they know folks tried. I can teach a boy to throw a diamond hitch. You can teach him why a promise binds. He glanced toward Tom and Clara. Your 2 would have a place. The assets are in motion, the banker said. We can proceed, the judge replied. This is not servitude. If the debt is to be worked, it may be worked with consent and wages. Mrs. Calder? Ruth looked at Pilgrim's Progress and felt Clara's fingers. Pride is not sold. Pride is carried. I will take honest work, she said. If the terms are written clearly, Hale nodded once. Clear as daylight. He drew a folded paper and a pencil. Ready, they sat at a side table. The banker leaned in with figures. The judge signed where it mattered. Ruth read every line and asked plain questions. Board a fair wage, Sundays free, her 2 under her roof. Instructions for the 5 he'd gathered from wrecked wagons and a river crossing. A room to make into a school with what they had. Ruth signed without a tremor. The gavel came down on nothing but the table. No sale. A beginning. Outside, the day smelled of cut hay and iron shoes. Hale's wagon waited, mended and true. 5 children watched from the tail, a ragged little army. Tom straightened. Clara hid and peeked. Ma'am, Hale said with a tilt of respect. Kids, this is Mrs. Calder. She'll keep you from growing up foolish. Ruth lifted her chin. We will keep one another, she said. Start with names. Ada, said a girl in a sunbonnet. Meg, said the next. Chase, the freckled boy with the bent ear. Luke, the one with the white scar. The smallest didn't speak. He touched the wagon board with 2 fingers, counting grain lines. Joe, Hale supplied softly. He talks when it suits him, Ruth nodded. Tom, Clara, say hello. Voices tumbled and settled. It wasn't much of a speech, but it set the wheel. A town can be turned by a few right acts. A man can carry his ghosts and still make room at his table, and a widow can stiffen her spine and step toward work that mends more than numbers. The wagon rattled into motion. Behind them, the courthouse door shut on old business. Ahead lay heat, a ranch road and a scattered family needing order like thirsty ground needs rain. Ruth gathered the children by look and voice, finding a classroom in the jolting seat and the patient Miles. The horses flicked their ears at flies and the reins creaked in his hands, a homely music that sounded like work beginning. Wind pushed heat along the road. Dust lifted slowly. She did not yet know how this day would matter. She knew only the first rule she would teach. We are not what owes. We are what we do to pay it right. The gate sagged like a tired elbow. Work lived here. Hale set the brake and stepped down. The house was low and honest, boards gray. A windmill ticked. Unload carefully, Hale said. Mrs. Calder's goods first. They're books, Chase reported. Then there are best cargo, Hale answered. Ruth took the porch in at a glance. The door that didn't close square. The neat cordwood, the broom bristles up. Plain she could live with. Disorder she would not. Ada touched the rail and came back with a splinter. A flour-dusted woman appeared. "Tilly," she said, "cook and peacemaker. You keep to the schoolroom and I'll keep to the stove." "Gladly," Ruth said. "I'll line the shoes and the days." Hale opened a small side room off the porch. "Used to be a harness room," he said. "You asked for a place. 2 windows, 4 stout walls, a nail keg, a coil of rope, and the smell of leather ghosts. That was the whole of it." Ruth saw desks in apple crates, slats cut from broken mirrors, letters chalked on flour sacks, and sums counted in beans. She felt a bell that did not yet exist ring clear in her ribs. "This will do," she said. "Wages Saturday night with the hands," Hale said. "Plain as posts. Board and Sundays are yours. I don't ask what you pray. If any man speaks crookedly about the auction, he answers to me. I'll need boxes, chalk, and a door that closes," Ruth replied. "Chase, Luke, apple crates from the loft," Hale called. "Joe, count them so no one falls." The little boy nodded and went to it. They stacked crates 2 by 2 until the room suggested purpose. Ruth laid out her small library, a primer, a battered atlas, and arithmetic rubbed thin where some child had erased too hard. Tom hovered. "I can whittle pencils," he offered. "You have cedar and a keen blade," Hale said, loaning his knife. Tom took it carefully. A hand drifted to the doorway, a match tapping his boot heel. "We're running a school now?" he asked, chin tilted. "We're raising hands who can read a tally and a weather line," Hale said without heat. "Saves cattle." The man's eyes slid to Ruth. "You fixing to teach me, ma'am?" "I teach anyone who means it," she said. "But I charge extra for patience." Tilly's laugh rose from the kitchen like warm bread. The man's grin betrayed him, and he went off muttering about fence staples. They ate beans and cornbread, coffee thin but hot. Ruth marched the children past the tin basin. Names were said to the lye soap. Joe whispered his to the bubbles. Clara pronounced hers. Everything mattered now. The order of cups, the chair's quiet scrape, the habit of listening. After, Ruth spread the atlas. "Find the river you crossed," she told Meg. "The green," Meg said, finger tracing a printed line that had not been miled. "It looks tame. Paper remembers the way," Ruth said. "That's a kind of power." Hale watched from the door, measuring and quiet. "Need anything else?" "A bell," Ruth said. "So we begin and end on purpose." "I'll find one," he said. "And put a hinge on that door before dark." He meant it and did it. While he worked, Ruth stitched pockets into flour sack cloth to hold slates and pencils, her needle going steady as a trail. Outside, the wind turned and the geldings blew softly. When the hinge took, the door shut clean and opened true. Ruth lifted and dropped it twice for the right little sound. A line was drawn, not to trap them but to give shape in a land that liked to sprawl. By lamplight, they fixed a simple plan. Chores then lessons. Letters before sums. Stories when the air was soft, arithmetic when it bit. Afternoons would borrow the world. Weather from the windmill, geography from the creek, history from Luke's scar and the missing buttons on Ada's dress. Tom would steady the little ones. Hale would keep his hands busy away from the door. "You've thought this out," Hale said. "I've had rehearsals," Ruth answered. "Life wrote them." Tilly slid 2 apples across the table. "For the teacher's desk," she said. "If we ever find the desk. We'll build it," Hale said. "The bell, too." Ruth lay down that night in a narrow bed with her children near and the door hinged to her word. Pride had not been sold. It had been hired into service with wages and a ledger to clear. Stakes were roof and meals and watching eyes, hers first, the town's after. At dawn, the windmill would tick and the bell, when they found one, would settle the day. For now, she let the hinges hold. Lesson 1 would be ready. How a thing swings right when it's set true. Tomorrow. The triangle rang sharply against iron. The day agreed to be counted. Hale hung the horseshoe triangle by the porch and struck it twice. Tilly's window lit. Ruth was already up, pinning back her hair, firm, no wasted motion. She stepped into the harness room that was now a school and took in what yesterday had purchased. Order from scraps. "Line up," she told the children. Hands and faces in the basin, then boots by size. Chase eyed the triangle. "Thought you wanted a bell." "We'll borrow this sound till we can name our own," Ruth said. "A bell is a promise. A triangle is a start." They tumbled toward the basin, learning the first arithmetic of a household, one after another, not all at once. Tom whittled cedar into pencils. Clara tested a slate rubbed in lard to hold chalk. The door swung true and clicked. The room kept its dignity. Lesson 1, Ruth said. She wrote a plain. For Abel. Say it. Abel, they said. Joe whispered it like a secret he might keep. Lesson 2, she went on. B for begin. By the time Tilly's pot hissed, they had an alphabet marching like a polite army. Ruth passed beans into cups and a story, how a straight line can be trusted like a fence sunk deep. After chores, Hale took Ruth and the older three to the creek where trail signs braided the ground. Read what you can, he said. Teach me if I'm wrong. Ruth knelt. The skirt that had stood in a courthouse settled into dust without apology. Hoofprint, no shoe on the left hind, she said. Calf dragged here, see the scuff? 2 men, one light on his feet, one with a bad right knee. Chase blinked. You can see all that? You can too, she said. Words are just tracks that hold still. She took a stick and wrote water in damp sand. Say this, Chase frowned. Ada whispered. Luke's scar whitened. Joe underlined. Water, he breathed. Then you've read, Ruth said. Trail signs don't shout, they suggest. So does the weather. Look up, the windmill tail pointed north. Cottonwoods flipped their pale undersides. A thin blue on the far ridge meant heat by noon. Ruth made them say it as fact. Hale watched her teach the land into sentences the children could hear. Back at the house, she laid out the plan, letters, sums with beans. Then the atlas where the printed river looked tame but told the truth if you traced its bends with a finger. Tom, proud with shavings on his shirt, offered pencils to each hand. Clara marched the smaller ones to the privy and back, duties like reins and little palms. Afternoon we practice counting cattle by tens, Ruth said. Chase calls numbers. Luke watches strays. Ida keeps tally. Joe stands by me and tells me when my breath turns fast. Why mine? Joe asked. Because you notice, she said. At first the count came rough. Voices tripped. But repetition is a patient horse. They tried again. Ruth's hand marked groups in the dust. Hale swung the gate to send them a moving sum. The crew paused between chores to grin at children who were suddenly accountants of hooves and horns. When Chase said 70 without losing the beat, the triangle gave an answering buzz. Like the day agreed the number meant something. Evening shouldered in. Heat bled away. The table stretched to make room for all the elbows it needed to hold. First supper was beans again, but they tasted different because there was a line of letters on the wall and a count that had not broken. Tilly set down a skillet of fry bread. For the teacher who makes my kitchen louder, she said. Hale passed Ruth the honey. He did not make a speech. Tomorrow those who can spell Abel earn a look at the ledger, Ruth said. You'll see how a ranch breeds, money in, money out, choices like Gates. That for children? A hand asked, skeptical. That's for anyone who lives on consequence, Ruth answered, which is to say, us. After the dishes, Hale brought in a dented brass bell found under an old harness. Clapper's gone, he said, but the throat's true. Then it will speak when we give it a heart, Ruth said. Joe touched the metal, counting dents. Hale cut a leather thong. Tom whittled a peg. Between them, in lamplight, the bell remembered what it had been made for. Ruth rang it once. The note wasn't pure, but it was agreeable, like mercy after a long, hard day. Heads came up in 3 rooms. Tomorrow, she said. We ring it for our start. The triangle rested. The day closed with its own tidy click. The ranch hadn't changed shape. It had changed intention. That is enough sometimes. The bell found its voice at dawn. The ranch stood straighter. Ruth rang it once, a measured stroke. From the bunkhouse and yard, folks came as if the note had told their bones what to do. It was only brass and leather, but a true start will make poor things mighty. Hands and faces, Ruth called. Then boots by size. They obliged, grinning like they were getting away with something decent. Hale leaned a shovel against the step. A fresh rope-burn nick crossed his thumb. Sit, Ruth said, pointing to the harness room chair. You don't need to bleed on your own planks. I've mended myself plenty, he replied, but he sat. She cleaned the cut with boiled water and thread-pulled lint, steady hands, no fuss. Joe stood to her left and counted to 10 under his breath. Hale didn't flinch, but his jaw eased when she tied the knot. Thank you, ma'am, he said. You're welcome, Mr. Hale. Wash around it, not over it. Tilly rattled a pan. If you two are done courting common sense, there's fry bread. Lessons began with the big bell's new word on the slate. Heart. A bell's heart is its clapper, Ruth said, and a day's heart is its vow. They copied. Chase made the H proud. Ada drew hers neatly. Joe touched each letter like it might fly away. After letters, Hale showed the stone boat drag. A good pull makes bad ground honest, he said. Ruth chalked that on the wall where she kept sentences worth owning. The schoolroom gathered maxims like kindling. By noon, a west wind brought grit. Ruth tied kerchiefs for the littles and peeled potatoes in clean, quick quarter turns. Hale planned a sticking porch lip until the door shut without bragging. Small things straightened other small things. A wagon rolled in with a crate labeled for the school. Inside, a tin of tea, 2 slates, a primer with a ship, and a brass handbell with a wooden handle already worn smooth. Who'd send such? Tilly asked. Folks who like to bet on a sure thing, Hale said. Ruth weighed the handbell. We use what good shows up, she decided, and set it beside their mended brass. This rings recitations. The big bell rings. After dinner, they walked the fence line for sums. Every post was 10, every brace a 20. The children counted up one pasture side and down the other, sun on their necks, numbers finding rhythm with steps. When Luke stumbled at 90, Ruth slowed the day to match him until the number caught up. They came home dusty and cheerful. On the porch, a brown paper bundle waited with Hale's name in a clerk's fast hand. He pushed it toward Ruth. You open. My roof, he said when she hesitated. Everybody under it shares the mail. She slipped the string. Inside lay a small tin of India ink, a steel pen, 2 envelopes, and a square of stiff Bristol. She cut the Bristol into cards and wrote each child's name in a careful hand that made them straighten. She wrote Tom Calder like a declaration, Clara Calder with a little flourish, then Ethan Hale on a card of his own and set it in the peg rack by the door. A man should see his name where it belongs. Hale touched the card like a pledge. That looks lawful, he said. It is, Ruth answered. Names tell a body which way is home. Toward evening, Tilly sent Ruth and Hale to the garden for onions. The air softened. Bees worked the last blossoms. They moved between rows like people who had earned their quiet. My mother taught school 3 winters in Kansas Territory, Hale said, stooping for a weed. Taught my pa enough to sign his will honestly. I'm sorry for your mother, Ruth said. She got old, same as anybody, he replied. Not every loss is a grave. The orphans were me trying to spend better. They filled the basket and started back slowly. At the porch, Ruth drew a small bundle from her pocket, wrapped in a scrap of blue. For you, she said, awkward as a left-handed nail. A button bone, you lost one. He smiled. I lose plenty. I mean to replace this one. She sat on the step with his coat across her knees and stitched with the neat economy of someone who has patched more than clothes. He stood there in honest post while her needle said what words did not need to. The bell rang the supper call. It rang clear because someone had given it a heart. The day warmed and settled like a horse talked out of dancing. At the long table, where elbows meant family, Ruth laid the handbell next to the salt and knew what tomorrow's first word would be. Gratitude, she would make them spell. Gratitude, then grace, because a place that stands straighter at dawn is a place where both can be practiced without shame. The gelding came in lathered and bleeding. The lesson did not wait for a bell. They were halfway through sums when the shout hit the porch. Hale crossed the yard in 3 long strides. Ruth was behind him, apron torn into strips. A young hand, Jess, had barbed wire in his sleeve and red to the wrist. The horse trembled and blew at the blood. Tom, fire the kettle, Ruth said. Tilly linens. Ada, hang the triangle quietly, no panic. Joe, count his breaths. Chase, fetch the whiskey, don't argue. Hale sliced Jess free with a knife. Wire took muscle, he said. Bad, not worst. Bad bleeds loud, Ruth answered. Pressure, then clean, then close. She set her palm and watched the red ease. Breathe, Jess, pain is a loud liar. Listen to me, Joe counted sure. 1, 2, 3. Ruth scalded the cloth with boiled water and whiskey. This will sting like truth, she warned, and flushed the wound. Jess swore once. Use what words you need, she said. Save the ugly ones for the wire. Hale held Jess's shoulder and left Ruth in the room, her hands required. That helped. Needle, Ruth said. Tom brought one from the mending tin. She held it to the flame till it blushed, threaded horsehair and set 3 deep stitches, 3 shallow. We close what can knit, she told Luke, who watched to learn. Outside, cattle shouldered a broken panel where Jess had tangled. Hooves clattered. Fear licked up. Hale, she said without looking up. Ride wide with the men. No whips, sing, chase fence top and be big. Luke, hand what I point to. Hale's hat tipped once. His voice went into an old trail tune, and the men picked it up until the yard had a heartbeat that wasn't fear. Ruth's needle made deliberate rescues. "Count," she told Joe again. The boy reached 10 and started over, a tide that kept them in time. She tied the last knot, rinsed the skin, and set Jess's arm on a folded sack. "You'll keep it high for 2 days," she said. "Sleep with your hand on your heart so it remembers its job." Jess swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." She cut a strip from her apron and made a sling that would not slip. "You'll heal because you'll obey." Outside, the herd bunched, then loosened under the weight of song. Chase stood tall. Ada tapped quiet time on the triangle. Tom cleared the yard of loose boards. Readiness had numbers now. Ruth carried a bucket to the gelding. "Good boy, easy," she said, washing foam from a quivering flank. She found 2 wire points and drew them out with the same patience she'd used on Jess. Tilly brought coffee. "You sew like you mean it," she told Ruth. "I do everything like it might matter," Ruth said, and the cup steadied her. Hale came back with dust on his beard and thanks in his eyes. "They turned," he said. "No break. You stitched faster than a prayer." "Competence is a prayer," Ruth answered, said with hands. He looked at Jess's sling, the gelding's calmer eye, the children moving like practiced parts. "What else?" "Fix the panel," she said. "We teach the fence the shape of right before dark." They set to it. Hale and 2 men stretched new wire. Tom counted staples. Luke held posts while Hale tamped. Under Ruth's direction, Ada wrote safe on a slate and hung it by the door. Joe gave 1 soft strike on the triangle when the last staple seated. Agreement from iron. Evening drew its line. Ruth checked Jess, then showed Tilly how to boil rags and lay them clean. "No touching the wound with fingers," she said. "Only cloth that's seen steam. Change morning and night." "You talk like a doctor," Tilly said. "I talk like someone who's buried people," Ruth answered, not unkind. "I'll sound bossy if it keeps him at the table." Supper was stew with onions from the row she and Hale had weeded. They ate like folks who had looked trouble in the eye and taught it manners. After, Hale set the wrecked panel scrap by the schoolroom door. "Keep it?" he asked. "As a lesson," Ruth said, and chalked across the gray wood. "Panic makes poor math. Beneath it, we count." The bell rang once for closure. Night settled. Jess slept with his hand on his heart. The gelding stood easy. The fence held. Ruth sat on the porch step with the bell's handle under her palm. Hale stood near a post again, solid without asking for notice. "Thank you," he said. "We keep one another," she replied, words from the first day deepening into proof. The stars came on, unafraid of the dark they lived in. The ranch breathed. The lesson had been precise, and it had been learned. Night settled like a clean quilt. The house finally breathed. Ruth sat at the table with the ledger open and the brass handbell turned on its side like a sleeping thing. The orphans lay in the bunk room, breathing softly. Outside, the windmill ticked slowly. She drew a line across the page. Flour, coffee, fence wire, whiskey for washings, 2 buttons, 1 hinge. Opposite, she wrote wages due and a small sum for debt service. She liked the words to stand straight. Numbers ought to be honest. Hale came in quietly, a mug in each hand. "Tilly says I pour too loudly," he said, setting one near her book. "Thank you," Ruth said. "We held the day." "We did," he answered. He leaned on the door jamb, not intruding on the ledger. "Jess sleeps. Horse dozes. Wire is tight enough to sing," Ruth nodded. "We mended more than the fence." She touched the bell. "A thing finds its voice when someone gives it a heart." He touched the welt. "True." She turned the page and wrote a word at the top in a steady hand. "Gratitude." Below it, she set down names. Tilly, for keeping the kettles. Jess for staying still. Joe for counting. Hale for singing the herd quiet. She left a space for herself and filled it. Ruth for doing each step once and right. "You keep score for the right team," he said. "I keep account," she replied. "Pride isn't a sin when it's clean." He pulled a chair. "Next Saturday is Founder's Day. Folks drag a piano to the square and pretend dust is lace. The town will expect us. They'll want to see the school they brag about without paying for. Public things take nerves," she said. "But children deserve a stage." "You could read," he offered. "Say something that makes even old men tip their hats straighter." "What would I read?" "Whatever you believe a place should be." Ruth closed the ledger and rested her hand on it as if it were a small, stubborn animal that needed calm. "I might tell them what today taught. Panic makes poor math. Counting together steadies a body. And work done right keeps trouble from getting ideas. That'd do. He smiled slightly. You talk like a trail boss, clean. She found herself smiling back. And you sing like you remember someone who needed calming. He looked past her to where the children slept. A little brother. Fever. A long time ago. I'm sorry, she said. I'm not, he answered, settled. He's why I kept the 5 and brought them here. A loss can be a road if you walk it clean. Ruth wrote another word on a scrap and pinned it above the door. Steady. She liked how it sat there. You'll need a ribbon for the girls at the fair, Hale said, standing. Maybe a kerchief for the boys. I can go to the mercantile in the morning. Blue for Clara, green for Ada, she said. Red would make Chase go fast. Best leave him brown, Hale laughed. You see them true. He reached for his coat. I'll oil the hinges before bed. Doors should never complain. He went to it. The smell of oil and quiet competence joined the room. Ruth took the bell to the porch and looked at the sky. The stars were clean holes punched in a good dark. She thought of the auction hall and the gavel that had not fallen on her name. She thought of the 5 faces in the wagon, and how the day had taught them that skill is a kind of mercy. She did not pray with words. Her jaw meant the same. On the porch step she tried a line aloud. Voice low as lamplight. We stand each other upright. The words felt serviceable, like a fence post set deep. Inside she wrote a last line in the ledger. We are not what owes. We are what we do to pay it right. Then she closed the book. Hale came back in, wiping his hands on a rag. Door swings easily, he said. So will tomorrow, she answered. If ever folks talk crooked about where I found you, you tell me and I'll stand in front of it. I'll stand for myself, she said gently. You save your standing for coyotes and weather. She lifted the bell. Thank you. He tipped his hat. Good night, Mrs. Calder. Good night, Mr. Hale. She set the bell where the morning light would find it first. Then she lay down with her children within reach and the ledger under the chair. Not because she feared theft, but because it felt like a promise kept near. The house breathed with her. Night tucked them in without fuss, resolved like a good knot held until daylight. The piano rattled into the square on wagon springs. The town decided dust could pass for lace. Lantern poles waited for dusk like spare thoughts. Bunting twitched in little winds. Bunting sagged between hitch rails. Children ran around a pump polished for the day. Ruth tied Clara's ribbon blue, Ada's green, and pinned brown kerchiefs on the boys. Hale came beside them, quiet as the weather you could trust. Founder's Day, he said. You'll do fine. We will, Ruth answered. Today the school stands where everyone can see. The judge banged a spoon on a tin plate. The ladies' aide read a list. The piano tried a hymn while mules flicked flies under it. Ruth set her handbell on a crate. Good morning, she said. My name is Ruth Calder. These are children who have crossed rivers and wind. She looked at the 5 and at Tom and Clara. We mean to be useful. Useful went further than pretty out here. Men straightened because the word fit. Lesson 1, Ruth said. She led the children in reading the sky. Wind from the west, high horsetail clouds, a dry line on the far ridge. She made them name what it would mean to a herd and a hayfield. She wrote the signs on a slate. Words are tracks that hold still, she told the square. And the square believed her. Lesson 2, she went on, tipping beans into a pan. Count by 10s to 100, Chase called numbers. Ada kept tally. Luke watched strays. Joe tapped the handbell at each jump of 10. The sound stitched the count like good wire. When they reached 100, the handbell sang and the piano answered with 2 notes. Lesson 3, Ruth said. She opened a ledger and held it like the law. Money in, money out. We choose by numbers, not guesses. She showed how flour and fence wire live opposite wages, how a fair share can pay a debt without selling a person clean through. Panic makes poor math, she said, and saw men nod as if they had been caught and forgiven in the same breath. Tilly hooted from the pie table. The square laughed. It's a good thing when a town hears itself think. The judge stepped up. Mrs. Calder, he said, if a place were wise, it would call this official. We ain't wise, but we can come close. He held up a paper. Certificate says you are engaged as a tutor at the Hale place and recognized by the court as a teacher for any child under that roof. A cheer took hold. Hale didn't shout. He was not a man to waste volume. but his hat came off in a slow arc that meant more than noise. Ruth took the paper and did not tremble. The piano rolled into a square dance because a body cannot think all afternoon. Hale held out a hand. "If you care to?" "I do," she said, plain as vows in a kitchen. They stepped into the figure. Ruth was light because she had taught them not to waste motion. Hale was steady because he did nothing he could not stand behind. In the middle of a turn, he said, not loud, "I'm glad the bank didn't get to name you." "I named myself," she replied. "You held the door." "That door's yours to close," he said. "And to open." It was not a confession, not yet. It felt like a post set deep before winter. When the set broke, Ruth drank from the pump. "You gave them a stage," she told Hale. "You gave them reasons," he answered. A small hush moved at the square's edge. A gentleman in a city coat stood with his hat pinched neat. He studied Ruth and wrote in a pocketbook. Hale saw him. The look he sent was brief and level. The man turned as if counting fences not yet his to count. Ruth set the unease aside. Evening drifted down with the lanterns. She climbed the crate again. "Last lesson," she said, voice low enough to make folks lean. "Gratitude." She named Tilly, the hands, the judge, the ladies' aid, and the men who had nodded at the ledger. "A bell needs a heart to speak," she finished. "A town does too." She touched the brass and it answered clean. On the road home, the children drowsed against each other. The paper lay safe in Ruth's lap. Hale drove with the reins easy. After a while, he said, "If you had a rope for that bell, what color would you choose?" "Plain," Ruth said. "A color can lie. A plain rope tells the truth." "I'll set the peg tomorrow," he said. "Set it deep," she replied. He smiled into the last light. "That's the only way I know." The bell rang hollow at dawn. Someone had stolen its heart. Ruth heard the wrong note before she saw the cut. The brass by the porch hung empty. The leather thong was sliced, the clapper gone. The rope end smelled of tallow. Whoever did it practiced small meanness. "We borrow the triangle," she said, and struck iron twice. Children tumbled into the basin. Hale came from the corral, jaw set but not hot. "Track?" Ruth asked. He showed a smear on the step, half boot, half haste. "Heel chewed to a V," he said. She wrote heart on the slate and underlined it. "A bell speaks because something inside it dares," she told them. "If someone steals your daring, borrow another kind." She tapped the triangle, and the day began on schedule for all to hear today. Letters ran, then sums. Routine faced the cut thong without blinking. Hale set Joe to oil the handbell. Tom and Luke checked hinges and latches. Ruth taught from the wreck. "We fix petty with honest," she said. "We don't answer small with small." Late morning, a buggy rolled up as soft as a cat that meant trouble. The man from the square stepped down, hat narrow, coat tidy. "Ezra Pike," he said politely. "Agent for the Sloan concern." "Mrs. Calder, there's misapprehension about your status." "My status is teacher," Ruth said. "The bank's lien predates your arrangement," Pike replied. "This employment may be evasion. Present yourself on Monday to sign a placement proper. The children will be cared for." "The children are cared for," Hale said. He didn't raise his voice. "On my land, by my leave." Pike's eyes went polite as ice. "Mr. Hale, your account shows wire, whiskey, hinges, on credit. Calls can be made." "You don't want me," Ruth said. "You want this example broken." "Precedent matters," Pike said. "A town runs smoother when it remembers who holds paper." He glanced at the certificate on the wall. "Monday," he said again and laid a notice on the table like a dead thing. His buggy left dust. Hale picked up the notice. "He wants to spook us," he said. "Spook the town worse, teach it that keeping your own is costly." "We will not spook," Ruth said. She pinned the notice beneath the certificate with a needle that bit straight through the board. "Let folks see what we answer." Trouble tested their edges that afternoon. The trough tasted of salt. A calf sneezed. Ruth dumped it, scrubbed with vinegar and grit. Grain lay sweet with sand mixed in. Tom found it under his thumbnail like a wrong sum. "Somebody means a break," Hale said. He burned the bad grain and brought out fresh from a sealed barrel. "We keep count of barrels like we keep count of days." At sundown, a strip of rag flashed white on the south fence. Grease-soaked, hawk feather tied, a spook flag. Ruth cut it free and folded it neatly. "Calming starts with seeing," she told the children. "Name the trick and it shrinks." They ate plain, potatoes with onions, bread without brag. Quiet sat but did not crowd. Hale studied the boot smear by lamplight. Heel chewed to a V, he repeated. I've seen that in our yard. Ruth thought of a man who tapped matches on his boot. She did not say the name. Names wait for proof. We lock doors, she said. We set watches without looking like we set them. Jess can sit lightly by the barn. I'll keep the school lit till 10 with copy. What if Pike brings the sheriff on Monday? Ada asked. Then we meet them in our doorway with our paper and our work and our neighbors, Ruth said. The town may like its dust fancy, but it likes fairness more. She looked at Hale. He wants fear to do his crowding. And he wants my herd at a discount when fear hollows us, Hale added. Buy cheap and call it lawful. Then we keep our value up, Ruth said. She wrote 2 words on the wall. Steady witness. We will stand and let them see us stand. The triangle hung by the door, a spare backbone. Ruth touched it before bed. We'll give the bell a heart again, she told it. He can't keep all the clappers in the territory. Wind came slowly across the pasture. A hawk called like a hinge. Hale checked the yard one last time and nodded to her through the lamplight. We're seen, he said, meaning by friend and enemy. Then we'll teach them what they're seeing, she answered. Tomorrow we practice reciting the certificate. Make it a song, he said, not quite smiling. She could. She would. The night had edges, but the house breathed within them. The lesson waited. Pressure names its want. We answer by holding shape. They lit the grass at first light. The herd answered like thunder. Smoke slid low through the yard. Ruth was at the kettle. Hale reached the door on the second breath. South fence flickered, grease rags strung to burn. Hoof noise gathered in the hollow where the cattle slept. Fear tried to do the counting. Triangle, twice, then 3, Ruth said. Ada struck iron, alarm, then work. Tilly wet quilts. Tom with me. Sheets make a fence if you hold them sure. Joe on the porch count. Chase watch the lead and call his turns. Luke swing to the catch lot. Hale, I'm there, he said. He flung the south gate open to the hay-baited lot. Men ran with him, no shouting. Ruth and Tom dragged 2 bedsteads to the yard edge, slung wet sheets over them. White rose in the smoke like a sudden rock. Calves bawled. A steer blew and veered, choosing the fence he could see. Hold, Ruth said, and Tom planted. Joe's numbers came from the porch. 10. 20, 30. Each 10 promised the math was still theirs. Fire ran quickly in the grass, licking at the porch. Tilly and Meg laid sopping quilts along the step, a wet belt that told flame its limit. Ruth smothered a tongue that reached for the harness room. On the south line, a rider showed. Match-tap swagger turned purpose. Heel chewed to a V. He carried a hawk feather rag and a bottle winking fire. Jory, Hale said, naming the hand who'd laughed at school. You're done, Jory threw. Hale shot once. Glass burst in the air. Fire died in wet grass. Jory spurred for the far gap. Luke was there with a rope laid low. He jerked it up at the last stride. Horse checked. Jory spilled and came up spitting soot. Men had him before he made a worse choice. Hands only, Hale said. We're straight. They bound Jory to a post with a halter rope, tight enough to tell the truth. 50. 60. Joe kept count like a bell with lungs. Chase called when the lead bull lifted to break right. Hale sang the old trail tune that reminds a chest to breathe. The herd poured through the open gate into the quiet and hay. One steer tested the sheet. Ruth never blinked. He followed numbers instead. At the slough edge, flame curled under the fence. Backburn, Ruth said, calm as a spelling word. Hale and Jess lit a thin strip ahead and walked with it, beating edges with wet sacks until the 2 fires met and quit wanting. 80. 90. Joe's voice rasped, but 10s kept landing. At 100, Ada struck the handbell. The note cut clean through the smoke like news. Ruth's arms shook. She held the sheet another breath. The last dozen pushed and were through, like stubborn sums finally agreeing to be counted. Hale swung the gate and dropped the bar. Thunder became breathing. Silence found the yard in pieces. Ruth wrung the sheet. Black water ran out. Hale faced Jory. Who paid you? Jory looked at the dirt. The world owes a man who's been laughed at. The world owes nothing, Ruth said, not cruelly. We pay in or we steal. Those are the only books, Jory's mouth worked. Pike said, there it is, Hale said. Ezra Pike and Sloan paper. He wanted us jumpy and light. We'll be steady and heavy, Ruth answered, and arrive first. They soaked the last ember and washed soot from faces. Tilly set coffee where hands could find it. Ruth wrapped Joe's rubbed palm in a strip of blue. "Bell color," she said. He smiled like a boy whose name was called right. Hale hitched the team. "We go to town with Jory in the wagon and our certificate pinned high," he said. "No secret trouble. If Pike planned to collect me by fear or her by paper, he could answer both in daylight." Ruth nodded. She lifted the mended brass bell, tied a hammerhead on a thong through its throat, and tried it. The note wasn't perfect. It was brave. Children stood taller. "Bring your sums," she told them, "and clean faces. We'll recite the law like a hymn." They rolled out with Dawn still chewing smoke. The herd stood settled in the lot, heads down, alive because order had been louder than fear. Ruth looked back once. The sheet fence fluttered like a flag nobody had to salute to believe in. Then she faced front. The square waited, and they would meet it with hands open and books correct. On the seat beside Ruth lay Pike's notice and the court certificate. She pinned them together and set the pair in the crate that held the bell. The paper could point either way. Today it would point theirs. Hale clicked the team. Wheels took hold. The road unrolled as resolve. We brought our trouble on a rope. The town brought its eyes. The wagon rolled into the square with Jory bound upright, soot on his jaw. Ruth sat straight with the crate at her feet, certificate pinned to Pike's notice and the bell beside it. A hammerhead tied inside where its heart had been cut. Hale stepped down and set his hat like an argument laid carefully. "Judge," he said. "We've come steadily." Folks gathered. Ezra Pike eased from the shade of the bank awning with a paper smile. "The Sloan concern regrets unfortunate events," Pike said. "It remains our duty to satisfy liens and to correct evasions." Ruth set the crate on a barrel and rang the mended bell once. The note wasn't perfect. It cut true. "My name is Ruth Calder," she said. "My children and 5 more live under Mr. Hale's roof. I am engaged as a tutor by contract, recognized by this court." She held up the certificate. Tom read the heading aloud. The judge took the paper, read, and nodded. "Lawful," he said. "As I signed it," Pike smiled thinner. "Law's a harness, Judge. People wriggle. Mrs. Calder's debts remain. The bank can place her in service elsewhere." Ruth pinned Pike's notice beside the certificate. "Paper can make things small or set them straight," she said. "We choose straight." She turned to the crowd. "Yesterday, Fear tried to do our counting. We counted together instead," Hale gestured. Men brought the broken panel scrap with Ruth's chalk on it. "Panic makes poor math." "Mr. Pike," Hale said, voice level. "One of mine set fire and spooked cattle at a profit for someone who'd buy low. He names you." Jory lifted his head. "He told me I'd be paid for showing the lady where she belonged." "Where she belongs," Hale said, "is where she works honestly and is paid." The judge's spoon banged a call. "Disorder roused deliberately is crime. The sheriff will hold Jory. Mr. Pike, if coin or counsel touch this, you will answer. For liens, the court recognizes wages agreed and debt service scheduled. There'll be no placing of a free woman while this stands." Applause came in, plain as rain. Pike's smile cracked. "Sloan remembers grudges." "We remember accounts," Ruth said. "Bring yours to the ledger." Pike folded his paper and stepped back into the shade. Jory went with the sheriff, a man who could begin again if he didn't admire the worst parts of himself. Ruth looked at the children. "Recite," she said softly. They did. Their alphabet, the tens, the line from the ledger. "We are not what owes. We are what we do to pay it right." The bell spoke and the piano answered with a chord. Hale cleared his throat. He took a breath like a rider choosing a river. "Mrs. Calder," he said not loud, "I'd like to set a peg for your bell on my porch permanently. I'd like a post beside it with our names, mine, yours, all the children's, and call that home. If you'll have it, it wasn't poetry. It didn't need to be." Ruth's work-tired heart stepped forward. "Yes," she said. "We will keep one another. There was bread and coffee." The judge signed a line that made the contract stout. The lady's aide pulled a length of rope from a coil and dyed it in walnut until it came out a plain, honest brown. By afternoon, the wagon rolled home. Hale planned the porch beam to be smooth. Ruth climbed the steps with the bell. Tom held the peg. Clara handed nails. Hale swung the hammer and set the brass where morning would find it first. He raised the square of Bristol she had written and drove 2 tacks beneath it. Ruth Calder, Ethan Hale. The children's cards followed. "Ring it," he said. Ruth pulled the new rope. The note walked the yard and touched the herd where they chewed in the lot. It sounded like a vow made public. They ate supper with the windows open. Jess's stitches held. Joe counted stars until numbers gave up. Hale went out and back with a small box. He set it on the table. "A ring," he said. "Plain," Ruth slid it on. "Plain tells truth," she answered. When the house settled, Ruth stood by the door and touched the rope. "A bell needs a heart," she said. "So does a home." The wind agreed on the eaves. The story that had started in an auction hall ended here, in a place made decent by choosing each other and doing the work. Neighbors walked away more slowly, as if the ground held meaning. If folks told it later, they said it two ways: the day a ranch stood straighter, and the year a woman's pride got restored, one honest lesson at a time. Subscribe and ring the bell for more clean frontier romances. Hit the like and share with someone who believes competence is a kind of mercy. Comment steady if you'd stand with Ruth and Hale, and I'll cue the next story for you first.